Good evening. Captain Retired Matt Edwards here with the Observation Post Weekly Report, 28th of April, 2022. Try to keep it short. This is my second broadcast on new time. I'm trying to see if it's better for me and the viewer if I have a later time than 8 o'clock in the morning. 10 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, getting right to it so I can get finished quicker and go back to just normal stuff, playing a game, watching TV, or whatever. Member of Parliament failing to investigate allegations might be a tort. I presume the Member of Parliament has a duty of care towards the voter and must try to resolve problems. Now what happened was I went to the Member of Parliament lots of times over the last 6 years, ever since Seamus O'Regan got elected. He did nothing. Not only that, I think they're actually trying to cover things up, because I've told them about the double and triple dip clawbacks. I've told them about my own situation. I've told them about lots of stuff. But one of the biggest things I told them about was they were breaking the law. Now, nobody likes to be told they're breaking the law. Well, if you want to avoid an allegation that you're breaking the law, then don't break the goddamn law. Anyway, the second point I put into my report was the condition of benefits. Now, as a reminder, that's what the insurance company will make you sign, maybe even Veterans Affairs Canada and maybe other government departments too, but they say they want to be reimbursed if you get something else. Now, the first thing I said was the Manuge case in Federal Court 2012 said it was Her Majesty the Queen. Now, the condition of benefits agreement that Manulife makes you sign, states that the company is owed money and not the government. So that puts a monkey wrench right in the gears right away, because it isn't signed between, the government and you. It's supposedly an agreement between Manulife and you. So therefore, well, why did Her Majesty the Queen get sued in the Manuge case, for example? Point number 2, the actual document states that Maritime Life, now Manulife, well, that's what I was just saying. So the other point I was talking about was that the judge in the Manuge case, I've reversed them. Hey, I'm just going over this again for first time since I wrote it up earlier. So in the Manuge case, the judge said in the report that I give no weight to the condition of benefits agreement. Now the government said the defendant invokes the reimbursement agreement. Now, how can the defendant invoke, put forward and say to the judge, we bring forward this document as what should be listened to? The person, the veteran, they agreed to let us take the money into account and reduce their service income support insurance plan. Well, first of all, I would say that, well, maybe I got to point it out here. I'll see if I do. Point number 3, the Canadian Forces Ombudsman 2003 report states the same. And parole evidence, P-A-R-O-L, that's post ex facto, it's after the contract was formed. You can't rely on something that you make someone sign after the contract is signed, okay? Contracts are about what you agree to. Now, if there's no money change hands, that's consideration in contract law, then the contract that they say is binding upon you isn't binding. For one thing, contracts are only binding on the parties who negotiate the contract. The CISA policy is allegedly between the Chief of Defence Staff and Manulife, and not the soldier. Therefore, they can't try to hold you to the condition of benefits agreement as if that matters. Anyway, I said in point number 3, get taxes from certain veterans to compare before and after the Manuge Federal Court 2012 cases. I have some already, and I might get additional information. Now, here's the gist of what I'm talking about. Many veterans who had to pay taxes on their settlement claimed they lost more money than they got. In reality, that should be impossible. Because, say you got $500,000 and you had a 50% tax rate. Well, you paid $250,000 in taxes, but you got $250,000 you didn't have before. So you didn't lose any money. But But here's the caveat. Tom Anderson, corporal, retired. He had to pay $160,000 taxes on $145,000 in taxable income. That should be impossible. Now, privacy/ignorance of the law. Consent is required under the Privacy Act, Section 5, brackets 1, for disclosure, but other acts of Parliament say they overrule the Privacy Act, so is collecting information on a consent form a breach of privacy in that the government can share without consent in law? So here's what I'm going on. And I had this big racket with my Member of Parliament staff because I asked them to help with my Manulife insurance. And they said that they needed a consent form. Manulife insisted that they needed a consent form. I said to the guys, the two yahoos, I said, listen, why do you need a consent form when I'm asking my Member of Parliament to assist me with solving a government problem? And Section 82G of the Privacy Act was put in there by Parliament in 1982 to give themselves an exemption from the requirement to get consent. Now, what I'm thinking is they might actually be breaking the law by collecting a consent form when they don't need to because they're collecting information they don't require. That's what I'm thinking. But they're trying to cover their arse. They're trying to make sure that when they contact someone on behalf of their client, that they can say, you signed a consent form. Well, what they should have done, hey, Tanya, is that they should have said, well, if we wanted it that a consent form is required every time, then we could have left Section 82G on the drawing board. They could have not put it into the law, and therefore a consent form would be required even for a Member of Parliament. But they wanted to make it easy on themselves, and it's common sense when you think of it. Here's my rationale about Section 82G of the Privacy Act. The voter votes. The Member of Parliament gets elected from the most votes that the voter, the voters in the constituency, they put in their votes and they tally them. The people who get elected are then acting with the political agency of the constituent. So when they represent me or you in Ottawa, that's with our political consent. Now, if you're going to look into a problem for your person you're representing, then you already have that consent with the vote. I think it makes perfectly good common sense, don't it? Whatever that is, it doesn't matter because Parliament passed a law that said they don't have to get a consent form. Now, I'm trying to think the wrinkle here, the hair in the ointment or whatever, is that Manulife is not a government agency. So if you thought about that, you'd say, well, why do we need a consent form under the Privacy Act when Manulife, as a private insurance company, should not be subject to the Privacy Act? But the government is not allowed to contract out of law. The government is bound by the Privacy Act, so therefore Manulife is also bound by the Privacy Act because they're the agent for the government. Now, I'm moving along. I only got 3 points left, and I'll probably be able to go back to having the game or doing something else. Lately, I've been watching a lot of them bastards in Russia, and I'm hoping that it gets blown up because they're invading a sovereign country as son of a bitches. That's on YouTube. That's my hobby lately. The Brian Ryan et al. Cases were actions against Her Majesty the Queen. So why is there confusion? Did taxpayers pay back Industrial Alliance for the punitive damages, which would have void the reason for punitive damages if the damages are passed on to somebody else? Now, what I'm talking about, there are 4 federal government long-term disability policies. There's the Sun Life one with the unionized public servants. That's the biggest one. Then there's the Manulife one with Cissy Financial Services for the Canadian Forces members. That's probably the second biggest one. Then there's the RCMP one with Great West Life, and that's probably the third biggest one. And then you have the Public Service Management Insurance Plan, which covers managers, non-unionized employees, and members of Parliament. Now, Bruce Bryan was a member of the Public Service Management Insurance Plan. He got T4As from Industrial Alliance. I'm trying to bite my tongue because it used to be National Insurance, but they sold their business to Industrial Alliance. So I keep getting caught on who it was. So the company sent out T4As on behalf of the government for the tax purposes. Now, Bruce thought he shouldn't have had any taxes on his long-term disability, so he went to tax court after he appealed and was denied. He won. They had to delete the T4As from his taxes in 2003. So that gave him tax-free long-term disability under one of the 4 federal government plans. Now tell me, why do we have to pay taxes on the other 3 plans? Now, 2006 comes along. He gets new T4As. Now this is the same company representing Canada, sends him T4As again after losing in tax court. When I was talking to the CRA appeals officer at the time, I was dripping with sarcasm, and I said, surely, Sylvia, the CRA did not make the man appeal. You granted his appeal, when he got a T4A he shouldn't have got after winning in tax court before. He had a precedent on his case, on his own file. But, oh no, CRA made him appeal. They denied his appeal. And then he had to go to tax court for the second time on the same fucking issue. Now, naturally, he won again, so they had to delete his T4As again. Now, this is twice he's been put through this mess, and he decides to sue the insurance company, National Insurance at the time, that later got sold to Industrial Alliance, and he got awarded $500,000 in punitive damages for breaching his peace of mind because insurance is bought for peace of mind. Now, he only owed $7,500 in taxes. So that was a lot. So the company appealed on behalf of the Government of Canada, and they knocked it down under the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal in 2014 to $60,000. Now, think about it. It's still a lot more money than he owed in taxes, right? So they said he owed, $8,000. They paid him $60,000 in punitive damages because they shouldn't have put him through the ringer for nothing. But that is supposed to slap them on the wrist so they won't do it again. Now, what I thought about the other day was, the government really was the underwriter. Now, if National Insurance / Industrial Alliance, if they had to pay $60,000 in punitive damages, did they just send a receipt to Her Majesty the Queen and say, we lost this court judgment, we won on appeal, the judge knocked the damages down to $60,000 instead of $500,000, but it's your insurance policy, not ours, and cough up the money? That would defeat the intent of punitive damages, because punitive damages are meant to give you a slap on the wrist so you'll never do it again. Now, if you pass the cost on to somebody else, then you just gave the middle finger to the justice system, right? So I'm thinking this could be a big issue. Now, many people will say, passing on is normal. Like if a business loses a case, it's going to jack its prices up to cover a lawsuit that it lost or something. But in this particular instance, you had the government hiding its identity behind an insurance company that was allegedly insuring the policy. They made him go through the hassle of having to appeal his taxes twice a year, go to court twice, and it's all about a peace of mind product. You're supposed to buy insurance, you pay the premium, and if the risk happens, you get the insurance. Now, what I found very interesting about this case is it wasn't about his insurance per se, it was about taxes on the insurance. Do you see where I'm coming from? They hide their identity for SISIP behind Manulife. They hide their identity for the Treasury Board policy behind Sun Life. Just hiding their identity makes them liable for punitive damages because they aren't acting in good faith. Okay, so have I properly explained that? Do you understand it? Now, I'm sure they'll disagree, and they'll say, that's already been before the courts. Why didn't the judge pick up on it? And blah, blah, fucking blah. And I spoke to the lawyer who represented the government, and they said that they told the judge that it was a government account, but the judge didn't accept it. At the time, I accepted that at face value, and I said, you tried. But really, they let the case go on, even though McKinnis Cooper knew the difference. That's not how justice is supposed to work, right? You're not supposed to let the judge make a mistake, and it makes me wonder, did they really try? But the lady lawyer who I spoke to said they did inform the judge of that situation, of their position. Now, it would be strange that they would have had that if they had had a different position than the Manuge case, where they represented Dennis Manuge, and they sued Her Majesty the Queen, it would have been astounding, right? Because obviously you can't look at something that's exactly the same and have a different position. Okay, I said look up the Minister of National Defense, Peter MacKay's reference with reference to. That's, if you see on my reports, I put WRT, Whiskey Romeo Tango, with respect to 100% of the CISA premiums being paid by Her Majesty the Queen in the event of a service injury. Now, here's where I'm coming from. When I read that in some kind of Hansard report or an Access to Information Act or something, I don't know where I found it, I was shocked. Peter MacKay is a lawyer. Now, a lawyer should know that insurance premiums are paid ahead of time and not after the fact. You don't put in a claim if you never paid the premiums and then expect to get paid insurance. So why the fuck did they put in there that anyone hurt in the service, the government will pay 100% of their CISA premiums? It's garbage. It's absolute bullshit. Ludicrous. Now, what I think is happening with the CISA policy is that they pretend that they take contributions or premiums off of the person's pay and the government matches it. What I think happens is that they look at how much they got to pay out, and then they pony up how much money they have to pay in claims, and that there's no actual premium exchanging hands. So what he said was an outright lie, sort of, if I'm right. Okay, my second to last point. On 18th of May 2012, Veterans Affairs Canada's Director General of Policy said that CISA was a prescribed clawback for the earnings loss benefit. Who was that? Who was that unknown bureaucrat that put out a policy that is actually a law, because they didn't make a regulation that said the Service Income Support Insurance Plan is a clawback, because we, as the lawmaker, the Member of Parliament, we decided that? No. On the 18th of May 2012, they put out something that if there was a law, they wouldn't have to put out a policy, they would simply follow the law. So they're treating this policy like a law. So when they take into account the CISA policy and reduce the earnings loss benefit / income replacement benefit, they're violating the common law, because in the common law, you're not allowed to take into account a non-indemnity, which means non-compensating amount, and contributory, that means you paid for it with your premiums. You're not allowed to reduce your damages by someone's insurance or pensions. You're not allowed, period. If you did, then you would be getting a windfall, because the person paid the premiums up front. You don't know if you're ever going to need the insurance. So you pay the premiums, and you might go through your whole career and never become disabled. So somebody might look at that and say, holy shit, I wasted all my money on premiums because I never became disabled, and therefore, that was a waste of money. No, you're supposed to be buying peace of mind. That's the entire reason for an insurance contract. You only buy peace of mind. You don't get anything material out of it. You get a psychological benefit. Now, what they do, though, the government and insurance companies, they have reduced the peace of mind to zero, because they say, oh, if you get this, if you get that, we're reducing your payment. Then, well, what did my premiums buy me, right? You're supposed to get the insurance as, you're supposed to get it according to the policy. But the biggest lie here is that normally it is not the insurance company, but it is the former employer who saves money, because the government of Canada hired Manulife to administer the policy for it. Great-West Life was hired by the RCMP to administer its long-term disability policy. So when a clawback for, say, the Canada Pension Plan disability is taken into account to reduce the payment, you're not saving Manulife or Great-West Life or Sun Life or Industrial Alliance money. You're saving the person, the entity that you used to be employed by. Now, I think that's scandalous, because the employer is not supposed to be getting fat, rich, off the back of a disabled person who used to be employed by that very same employer. If you have an insurance company that's doing it, well, you could say there's three parties in the situation. There's the former employer, there's the former employee, and there's an insurance company. So you have three parties, and each party is supposed to look after their own legal interest. But if you have two parties that are forming one party via the agent principal legal concept, so the government hires Manulife, so they are one party. And you have the Canadian Forces member, they are the other party. Now, if you have a dispute, and let me use Russia and Ukraine again, you have a dispute. Two sides are taking their own side. You don't have a third party trying to mediate. Each party is going to take their own side. They're not going to be so magnanimous that they're going to say, well, we agree with you. They're not. They're going to want what's best for them. So the employer is trying to save money for its salary expenses, for its long-term disability expenses. So it hires a company to make it appear like there is an independent third-party insurer, but in fact, Her Majesty the Queen gets sued and not Manulife. Now that should make you scratch your head. Listen, if Manulife is the insurer, then why did the government, the taxpayer, why did they get sued? See? So you can't keep lying to us like the Russians are lying about all that stuff in Ukraine, saying they're Nazis and stuff, and they're trying to claim all this ludicrous shit, when you should have a brain to be able to look at what someone's saying and saying, hey, buddy, you just said this, you're full of shit, okay? I don't believe bullshit, and if you're telling me bullshit, then I don't trust you. Well, by them saying that Manulife, excuse me, by them claiming that Manulife is the insurer, they are prima facie, on its face in Latin, violating the utmost good faith involved in insurance. It's one thing to buy insurance from a third-party insurance company. They will give you a price. You could take it or leave it. Insurance is often sold by boilerplate contracts. In other words, you don't go in and negotiate a contract with them personally each time. You walk into an insurance company's office and they'll say, here's the deal, and lay it in front of you, and if you want it, you sign it, and if you don't want it, you walk away. You can't walk away with the military, because they brought out a law in 1982 actually. Queen's Regulation and Orders 208.53 came into law in 1982, and what used to be a voluntary insurance policy that the person chose to buy, they made mandatory. Now that's a violation of freedom of contract right there. Before, you had freedom of contract. If you were a soldier between 1969 and 1982, you had freedom of contract, and you could choose not to buy it or buy SISIP, long-term disability. But the government took that freedom away by mandating it in the law. I spoke to Andy Molosenko, who was there at the time, and I said, listen, Andy, tell me what they did. He said they brought us into a briefing room, they said this is for your own good, and then they dismissed us. So the word was, this is for your own good, and we're bringing this law to make you pay the premiums, but usually you have a choice in what insurance you want to buy. Normally, you could go out and see who gives you the best deal. But the government took that freedom of contract away, and that could likely be a tort or some other wrongdoing. Okay, almost done. Thank God. I don't like to do these, by the way. I'm doing them because I think I have to. I have a duty to try to get these people cut. Okay, nobody else seems to notice what's happening, or they don't care. Either way, veterans are getting shafted. So if I thought that, things were going to go along without my heckling, badgering, whatever, I wouldn't be making these videos. I keep telling myself I'm going to soon try to figure out a lawyer and try to get this all started and try to stop doing this stuff and just taking the task legally. If I trusted the court system, that is, because I don't like the way the court system is done, because like that thing with Bruce Bryan, he shouldn't have had to appeal his taxes twice. I mean, that's nuts. And Dennis Manuge went on the Pension Act clawback. Well, couldn't they have looked at the other clawbacks at the same time? But I have this theory. The theory is the government wanted the class to win. They knew the veterans were right. So they had to try to find some way to win, but not let too much have to get paid back. So they chose to pretend that the Pension Act is pension is for pain and suffering, when it is not. Never has been, never will be. Yet they made it a moot point because they got rid of it. See? So they got rid of the Pension Act, which is an indemnity for your injury in military service. It's the same thing as workers' compensation for a civilian who gets injured on the job. So a civilian, they get workers' compensation and they lose the right to sue. If you're a military member and you get injured, you get the Pension Act pension under the old days, and you lost the right to sue. Now, whether you have the right to sue under the new Veterans Charter, that is an open question. I don't know. I could argue both ways. The government says it's compensating you for an injury, but it treats the money like income and not compensation. See? You can't tax damages, compensation, but you can tax income. Now, a lot of the stuff comes back to income taxes. That's crazy. Last point, budget 2012 and the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act robbery. Now, I use that word on purpose. People might say, what are you talking about, Matt? How is it robbery? Well, pension actuarial liability is always the responsibility of the employer, so raising the employee contribution is theft. Do you get it? If you paid $0 in contributions toward your pension, the government has to put in enough money to keep the plan afloat, because a pension, a retirement pension, I differentiate that because I was just talking about the Pension Act pension, and although they have the same word, pension, they're meant for different things. The Pension Act pension is compensation for injury. The Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension is a retirement pension, which is savings. So when you serve in the military, or you work in the public service, or you serve in the RCMP, they decide to give you, because they have these acts, so much money to live on now, and they put some away for you to live on in the future. So that's the contribution. Now, if they had no contribution, they're still required to put the money in for the pension, because that's how pensions work. So when Harper came out in 2012 and he said, this is not fair, what he meant is it's not fair to the taxpayer. He's saying the government puts in, and I'm using the 2007 report on the Treasury Board total expenditures. So in the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension, the government puts $3.78 in for every dollar that the soldier puts in. So now, if you're the employer, that looks unfair. That the soldier puts in $1, the government puts in $3.78, and the person gets a pension. How is that fair, they're thinking. So Harper said, well, we're going to make it 50-50. Now, why did they want to make it 50-50? Well, they had the Canada Pension Plan there as an example. But the difference is, and I don't think I read it, I think this is my own thoughts. The difference is that the Canada Pension Plan is a multi-employer retirement pension. But the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, the Public Service Superannuation Act, and even a private company's pension plan, that's a single employer pension. So if you have multiple employers, how are you going to have a no contribution pension? The Canada Pension Plan has to be money put in by the employee. But a single employer pension, like the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, if you're not serving some other employer, some other entity, then they could easily have no money put in out of pocket, no contributions. That could be because many employers have that very same policy. Now, people will probably say, that ain't fair, Matt, because they've been brainwashed by the Canada Pension Plan. Since 1966, that's the way the Canada Pension Plan has operated. Now, to that I say, well, how about the way the common law treats pensions? And then we refer to a case, IBM versus Waterman, 2013 Supreme Court of Canada. Now, Mr. Waterman had been a long-serving employee of IBM and had been fired unjustly. So because he got fired unjustly, he sued and won. But the company said, he never paid a cent in his contributions for his pension. So, Judge, we'd like to take into account the pension that we paid for, because if not, he'll be getting too much money. Now, the judge said, pensions are property, and, even though you paid the money into the pension, he earned it with his service. So that's his property that you put away every time you put a payment into the pension plan on his behalf. That's his money. You cannot take into account his money to reduce your legal damages. Perfectly good logical argument, because pensions are property. So the government would have you to believe that pensions are income. They're not. How can they be both income and property at the same time? Impossible. Why do I say it's impossible? Because there was a case in 1990 regarding the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension in a divorce. Clark versus Clark, Supreme Court of Canada, 1990. At the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal, they said that the pension was income. Then it got appealed to the next higher court, and there is no higher court after the Supreme Court of Canada, and they reversed the Court of Appeals decision, and they said pensions are not income, they're property. So it came down to a binary choice. A pension is either income or property, and the courts said it is property. Now, who are we to disagree with the highest court in the land? So if the Supreme Court has already ruled on this, and not just that case, there are other cases that say that pensions are property, like the IBM case, then how come we're dealing with this bullshit like, say, bridging? So the government says that if you get the Canada Pension Plan and you get the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension, then we made a law that said that this is called bridging, and therefore you're going to lose some of your pension property, even though you have another pension property. Now, what kind of bullshit is that? It's not like it's income. You're getting two forms of saving back. When you retire, you get, if you qualify, there are legal rules, but if you qualify, you're supposed to get all of your money back, not just some. Now, I predict that they're going to have to pay a lot of money one of these days, especially, and I'm going to throw this in as my last point, especially when they send out a bill. They say something to the effect of, our headquarters has been advised that you were awarded the Canada Pension Plan Disability. And in 1966, the government of Canada decided to integrate these two pensions, and they called it bridging or something. And then they'll say, because there's a retroactive portion here, you owe us this much money. In my case, it was $9,800 under the Public Service Superannuation Act pension. But the thing is that there are two different acts. And what I just was recently thought of in my case was that I got the Canada Pension Plan in 2014, November. But they sent me a letter on the 26th of July, 2013, and they said, thank you for your third application, Mr. Edwards, but you don't qualify. Now, it's awful funny that they approved me when I shouldn't have got approved, and I think it's because they save money on all of these clawbacks. So how else can you say that I should have been approved when they told me categorically, black and white, in a letter, in written form, in 2013, but the Canada Pension Plan Disability goes back 15 months in retroactivity. And it just struck my consciousness the other day that actually it goes back to, say, June of 2013. So that predates the letter that they sent to me, and I don't think they know or care. But it's absurd. The government is supposed to act in a reasonable way. And that wasn't even what I meant to say. What I was going to say is that if I had signed an irrevocable consent form that Service Canada puts out, then the money would have been sent to Sun Life and not Manulife, even though they wanted it. But Manulife would have been second fiddle because I got Sun Life back in 2009. Now, Sun Life were the ones who was making me apply, so Treasury Board, the main government insurance, could save money. And if I had signed the irrevocable consent form, instead of me getting $14,351 in 2014 or 15, then the money would have been sent to Sun Life. Now, not so long ago, I thought about, well, if somebody gets money and then somebody sends you a bill because you got the money, if you don't get the money, they can't say you owe money because you got the fucking money. Don't that make sense? So any Canadian Forces member or public servant who gets a bill for bridging based on the money that they got from the Canada Pension Plan, but they never actually got the money from the Canada Pension Plan, that entirely voids any claim that the person owed money under bridging. Tell me, do you see the common sense of that? Because if you don't get the money and it got paid to a third party by the Government of Canada by direct payment, they have no right to send you a bill. Isn't that correct? Tell me if, Matt, you're missing this point. Or Matt, you never thought about that. Or something like that. Because then that situation I just described gets worse, because you get a tax bill based on the money that was sent to Manulife, Sun Life, Great West Life, or Industrial Alliance. You never got the money. Now, there is a principle in taxation that says in order to be taxed on the receipt of money, you have to actually receive the money. It's a no-brainer. So if you don't get the money, Manulife got paid the money, you can't be required to pay taxes on that sum of money. Zero legal tax liability. If you want to tax someone, tax the people who received the money. You want to tax someone, send the Manulife, Great West Life, and Sun Life, and Industrial Alliance a tax bill. Don't send it to the disabled person who don't have the wherewithal to understand that they're getting screwed by the government for money they never got. They're getting taxed on the money they never got. Mark my words, this is going to be a scandal one of these days when someone finally listens. Somebody should have to pay huge punitive damages. The government should have to pay huge punitive damages to the disabled person who has to pay tax on money they never got. They should have to pay huge punitive damages to people who get a bridging bill for money they never got. I can't claim that because I didn't sign those forms, so I got the money. But I have letters that veterans have sent to me, and one of them was exactly what I just said. Canada Pension Plan said we sent the money to Manulife. Now the thing is, if they get Canada Pension Plan, they're likely qualifying for the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension too. So the person who sent me that letter, I bet you they got a bridging bill. See? Anyway, that's long enough for today, and let me know if you think that the Thursday night's better, or maybe I'll try to come up with, a different time if people find it more convenient. I would rather not do this. I would rather that the shit hit the fan and they get caught than I keep beating my head against the wall, talking to the phone. And I was telling some of the fellows I was playing video games with, and they're in Australia mostly. I said, it's funny. I was trying to make a bit of a joke. I said, I signed up to Twitter years ago. That's what they were talking about, Twitter. I said, I set up my Twitter account and I didn't realize you had to have followers. And I was posting stuff and I was tweeting to the void. Because if you don't have followers, no one's going to listen. See? I also set up my Twitter account to Lawnboy, capital L, A-W-N, capital B-O-Y, because I'm from Lawn. And then I put 5 sevens after it because I thought you didn't have to use your name, or you couldn't use your name. Which I find out later was wrong. So I don't know how to change it, or I didn't care. So I haven't been active on Twitter, but I have over 2,000 followers on Twitter. I have about 2,800 on Facebook. Now the reason I have so many is because I want to get the word out. Not because I really have 2,800 people that are my friends. I mean, they might be acquaintances, or they might know me through Facebook, or someone who knows me knows them or something, but it's because of the fact that I want the word to get spread, to get disseminated, that I have so many people on my Facebook as my friends. On that note, you guys have a good weekend, and thanks for bearing with me.